Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on satellite imagery in the financial services. My name is Nick Hardwick, and I'm one of the co-hosts for this lovely panel that we'll be having for you today. I wanted to start with some housekeeping and just some general things before we get into the actual panel. As you can see on your screen, if you have any questions at any time or something that sparks your interest, please put your comment in the chat and we will address and collect any questions that you may have at the end of the webinar. We've scheduled some time for some Q&A, so if there is anything you want to ask, please put it in the chat. We'll be keeping track of that. Please also note that the webinar is being recorded, and if you do want access to it after it's done, if you can't stay for the full length or you want to show it to some colleagues, we will also make that available to you and to anybody that may be interested in it. So let me get into just the introduction bit of this panel. As I said, my name is Nick. I am the research associate for DFI, or Digital Frontiers Institute. We're based in Cape Town, but we really have a broad global population of students and peers in the digital financial services. And part of my role is to coordinate and disseminate research amongst the membership bases that we deal with. And we've been lucky enough to have a partnership with Phyto, and this is our second webinar that we're now running this year, and we hope to have a couple more. I am, as I said, the research associate, so if you want to know anything more about DFI, you can find more about us on our website, which is digitalfrontiersinstitute.org, or you can find an email address or contact detail, and you can ask questions about that. We do short courses and executive training, but that's about us. I'm going to hand over to Maha, who is the moderator for this panel, and she'll be introducing and talking a little bit more about what we're dealing with today.
Thank you so much, Nick. Hi, everyone, and thank you for attending. As Nick mentioned, I'm Maha, and I am the Senior Manager at the Phyto Partnership. So the Phyto Partnership is the MasterCard Foundation Partnership for Finance in a Digital Africa, and it's an initiative of the Foundation's Next Generation Financial Services Program. The partnership brings together knowledge and insights to promote meaningful financial inclusion in an increasingly digital world. And to do this, we work directly with the Foundation's portfolio partners. There are 8 of them, some of whom are on this call, as well as financial institutions, mobile operators, fintechs, and others in the space. Our ultimate goal is to inform decisions with facts and accelerate meaningful financial inclusion for people across sub-Saharan Africa. And part of our work includes conducting research to address pressing and forward-looking issues in digital finance. And this year, we have a focus on financial inclusion in a platform era for our research. Earlier this year, we conducted research on how organizations in East Africa use or do not use big data. And we then specifically focused on the use of satellite imagery in financial services and published a case study featuring Apollo Agriculture and Harvesting, who we are speaking with today. So look forward to a great discussion. I'm just going to hand it off to the panelists to introduce themselves. Eli, if you can start.
Sorry, I just had to get off mute. Hey everyone, this is Eli. I'm the CEO of Apollo, and we help smallholder farmers maximize their profits. So at Apollo, we use machine learning, remote sensing, and mobile phones to provide a customized package of finance, farm inputs, and advice that can double farm yields, and we're operating in Kenya at the moment. So before I founded Apollo, I spent 4 years helping build a company in the US called the Climate Corporation, where we used machine learning to help commercial farmers make better decisions. And so during my time there, we were quite successful. We grew to sort of 60 million acres, and we were acquired for about $1 billion, but I realized we were sort of working on the wrong problem. You know, we had all this fancy technology, but we were ultimately focusing on helping a US farmer gain a few percent. And so why were we doing that when we had the opportunity to help tens of millions of smallholders double or triple their production? And so at Apollo, our basic view is that actually we understand what most smallholders need to increase their production, but historically they haven't been able to access these tools because serving them is too expensive. And so we'll cover this on the call, but I think at Apollo, what we're most excited about is that we think technology really enables a new approach to serving smallholders. You know, satellites let us see what's happening anywhere. Machine learning lets us understand what we're seeing, and mobile phones and money let us communicate and transact with nearly anyone. And so essentially we build on these advances to take a fundamentally simple and proven set of products, package of seed, fertilizer, advice, insurance, and credit, but deliver it in a new way that can scale much faster. anyways, thanks. I'm Eli.
Thank you. Richard, do you think you can introduce harvesting?
Sure. Hi. Good morning, everyone, or good evening. This is Ruchit dialing in from California. Little bit of my background. I grew up in India and moved to US about a decade ago. I'm a serial technology entrepreneur. When I sold my previous company in 2015, around that time, I started looking into the areas where I could make a positive impact on the world. And what I realized that there's a massive data asymmetry between the farms and anyone else in the agriculture value chain. And AI and remote sensing provided an opportunity for us to build this massive global agriculture intelligence system, which now is capable of providing really key metrics about the farm at the global level. And to use this, there are so many use cases for us to be able to drive. And we decided that small farm holders focusing of the technology to drive the financial inclusion would be a perfect use case. So we started there, and we have now projects going on in Uganda, Nigeria, soon starting in Kenya, starting in India, Myanmar. So we have about 100 plus financial institutions who we are working with closely across 6 to 7 different countries. It's an exciting journey so far, and I hope we'll share more over this webinar today.
Thank you, Richard. And last but not least, David.
Thanks, Maha. So David Taverner here. I'm a Senior Director in Caribou Space. Caribou Space is focused on bridging the space and development worlds. So we work with space agencies, governments, development agencies, and private sector space companies under that objective. So for example, some of our clients include the UK Space Agency, the European Space Agency, USAID, the development agency in the US, Inmarsat, a UK satellite operator, and others. All focused though on using space capability to address environmental and societal challenges around the world. And you can see more information on caribou.space. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. So just to give you, our listeners, some background, Earth observation satellites can capture data that traditional means cannot. So for example, farm crop yields, mapping crops, planting cycles, and trends in production. And this can actually help forecast revenues, potential repayment deficits, and timing of income. We are actually now seeing organizations like Pula, for example, develop affordable and effective insurance products for farmers, and they're using a combination of traditional and non-traditional data sets like yield and weather data, as well as satellite imagery to track weather patterns and capture changes in crops as well as the farmland. And in terms of credit scores, satellite imagery in combination with demographics, financial, agronomic, geospatial, and psychometric data, it provides enough detail on clients who don't actually have an established credit history to make lending decisions. So we heard briefly from Apollo and Harvesting that they can generate credit scores, and they are able to use algorithms that rely on mobile phone and alternative data, as well as machine learning of farmers' needs, incentives, behaviors, and agricultural activities. So I'd like to start by asking Eli, given the capabilities of the technology that I just highlighted briefly, but also some of the challenges that our case study highlighted, such as the technical skills that you need to interpret satellite imagery into meaningful insights, and also the technical infrastructure that is required to store and compute the data, do you think that there's enough predictive power in satellite imagery for credit purposes?
Thanks, Maha. So I mean, I guess based on the framing of the question, fundamentally you're asking about, is the ROI there? So it, takes all of this effort to do it, does what you actually get out the other side justify it, economically or otherwise? And I think this is one of these questions that, to be frank, we're going to have a lot clearer of a sense of in a couple of years. I mean, this is absolutely a nascent space, but based on what we can see today internally, based on our data, I'd say the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, some of it depends on sort of the investment you're willing to make and the time horizon of what you're looking for in terms of a return. I mean, if you're starting as a team and you have no capabilities working in this area and you're expecting to just sort of show up and a couple of days later have satellite imagery or machine learning solve all your problems, then the value is not going to be there. I mean, these questions take time and iteration to answer, like any sort of science R&D style problem. But given sort of, real investment over time, which is, collection of the data, cleaning of the data, processing of the data, running experiments, repeating those experiments, learning, and then consolidating those learnings and continuing, I think there's absolutely predictive power there.
Okay, well, that's really encouraging to hear. And I had mentioned earlier that we've seen that these credit scores are particularly helpful for people who don't actually have credit history, and it's, these thin file clients. And I know that you're focusing on smallholder farmers. So just in general, like, is satellite imagery more suitable for any particular type of customer?
Sure. Well, I mean, like you said, there's rarely a better credit score than previous borrowing history. So for customers who are not in this sort of thin file camp that you mentioned, using any of these alternative sources for credit scoring, is probably going to be most valuable in a case where you're looking at a customer who otherwise wouldn't have much of a financial story. In terms of satellite imagery in particular, I guess I'd highlight two things. The first is, we've started looking well beyond just the patterns we can pick up on the farm, into things that we can see, anyways, beyond just agricultural practices. But to the degree that you're looking at the farm, obviously things that are not observable from space are not going to be very useful. So if you have somebody growing tomatoes in a greenhouse and you're trying to build up some sort of index based on that for the purposes of credit scoring, that may not end up being that useful. The other thing that I'd say is that whether you're looking at thin or thick file customers, just to use that parlance, we've seen a lot of value in other operational efficiencies that satellite imagery can bring to the process, whether that's, ensuring that we know exactly who we're making our loan to and exactly how much land they have and exactly how they're using it, to, monitoring how that crop's progressing over the course of the season and giving us an earlier sense of risk. And so I think, from a credit scoring perspective, obviously the particular value lies in the folks who otherwise really wouldn't have much information available, but that there's valuable kind of, across a much broader population as well.
Thank you for that. So Richard, given the predictive power of satellite imagery that we were just discussing earlier, where do you think it brings the most value? Would it be at the beginning of the process when you're actually vetting a client and onboarding them? Or is it the predictive power to actually evaluate a client's repayment behavior?
So remote sensing itself doesn't have, I would say, predictive power on its own, right? We need to realize that remote sensing is a great data source which you need to translate into some meaningful intelligence. And then you apply it into different use cases within the agri-lending, for example. So as far as when harvesting works with, these, n number of lenders across the world, what we have realized that there's a use case before loan. So before loan, the lender wants to understand, want to have a better understanding of the creditworthiness of the farmer. And as Eli was mentioning, nothing beats the historical borrowing patterns, the transactional history, the lending history. But if you have the satellite imagery of that area of interest, possibly you could also do some sort of assessment for the farmer. So for example, best assessment of cash flow for the farmer is standing on in the field. And typically when we engage with the farmers in Uganda or in let's say Myanmar, those things left untouched, especially when these lenders are trying to scale and make their operations more efficient. So we see a lot of value even in the pre-loan part of this ecosystem, where a lender is trying to establish the credit assessment of the farmer, as well as on the post-loan side. So we have organizations who have let's say 14,000 or 15,000 farmers who they have given loans to, millions of dollars, and they're looking for a way to monitor their loan, because many a times, let's say they have given loan and there is a flood there, or a drought there, or some sort of a weather event happened, and they want to be able to understand if there is an impact of that flood in the village, and how it may have impacted their farms in the portfolio. Similarly, in many cases, there are instances of potential fraud, and typically a lender would have to send somebody from their lending office, go there and visit the farm individually 3-4 times and during the entire cropping season, which is a major roadblock for them when it comes to scale. And it works on if you have 100, 200, 500 farmers, but at scale, it starts creating efficiency issue. And that's where we also add really a lot of value. So in a nutshell, there are a lot of value, both pre-loan as well as post-loan, building the credit assessment, as well as helping lender understand how the farms may be doing, what may be the intent, what may be the possibilities of getting the returns during the loan season. And also, there's an opportunity for lender here by leveraging the intelligence gathered from remote sensing to help these borrowers grow more. So because we can provide intelligence about what and how the crop may be panning out, they can choose to launch value-added services, which is both great for both lender as well as borrower.
Great, thank you, Richard. So it seems like, as you said, pre-loan, post-loan, it can feature in a decision-making process. David, given your work with UKSA and ESA, we've been talking about, we've talked about credit scoring and insurance in terms of using satellite imagery. What other use cases are you seeing satellite imagery being used for? And who are the end users and clients of these use cases?
Sure. So just to explain the UK Space Agency program that we work on, they have a very large fund, about £150 million fund called International Partnership Programme, using UK official development assistance funding. And that is focused on using space technologies, including Earth observation, remote sensing, to solve development challenges all over the world. Within that portfolio, there's currently 33 projects across about 30 countries, so Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Pacific, to a value of about 120 has been invested so far. There is a lot of agricultural projects in there, a lot of disaster resilience, climate change, deforestation, maritime fishing. So a real sort of cross-section of sectors. In terms of use cases in financial services, there's a number of those projects, particularly in the agricultural sector, where there's a focus on improving insurance for farmers. I'll give one example from a project in Mongolia by a UK company called Eosphere. It's an Earth observation company here in the UK. And they are focused on improving insurance for herders, yak herders, because in Mongolia they have every now and then, every few years, what's known as a zud, which is a very severe winter that kills a majority of the livestock and is very damaging to the herders' livelihoods. So to improve on the insurance schemes that they have available, they're using Earth observation to provide very, very accurate visibility to, within Mongolia, which regions were impacted most negatively, where was the most loss of livestock, so that the insurance payouts and insurance schemes can be A, more affordable, B, have the right premiums attached to them, and C, be run at a fair return to the insurance companies in Mongolia. So that's one example. I'll drop into the chat box a brochure of all of the projects so people can read those. To your other question around who are the customers, so speaking from the UKSA portfolio, most of the customers are actually governments, so Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Forestry, Ministry of Environment. There are then a number of projects that are large-scale private sector customers, so that could be large-scale agribusiness, It could be energy companies, it could be industrial companies, fishing companies, etc. There are then a few projects, and these are actually all in the agricultural sector, that are focused on smallholder farmers, sort of business to customer type relationship. So a real sort of spread in the portfolio of examples. And again, I'll share that link to the brochure now.
Great, thank you. And so amongst everything that you've mentioned, where are you seeing the most impact and success from these use cases that you've discussed?
So the big success point, I think, in remote sensing and Earth observation is being able to see the unseen. So remote sensing really just gives you information about the environment in which you're operating. And as mentioned, that has benefits in forestry, it has benefits in agriculture, it has benefits out at sea in terms of fishing. And it's really the biggest successes are where it's very hard to observe those environments with human teams on the ground. So for example, very remote regions, rural farms in Eli's example of being able to see the indications on those farms that would lead to a credit. Conflict states or fragile states is a big area where it's very difficult to see what's going on the ground, and obviously wide geographies, so forests and oceans. So these are the areas where space and the ability to see from space has a natural and very significant advantage over traditional ways of solving these problems, which are typically sort of ground-based.
Okay, great, thank you. So this is for anyone and any three of you to answer. So now that we have heard more about use cases and the predictive power, what lessons can financial service providers learn from these use cases that we've just discussed, and like how replicable are these learnings for the financial sector? For anyone to answer.
I mean, for us, given we are working with several financial institutions across the emerging market, these are definitely replicable, but it's not a copy paste, if I can say that. Each organization is different, their challenges are different, the context is different. The key layer of technology we have may still be the same, but how you use it is going to be different based on what your objectives are, what is it that they want to solve. Broadly, the technology platform we have built at Harvesting allows lender to become a lot more efficient, allow them to scale across the boundaries they may be serving today. But at the end of the day, it's from our perspective, we have seen it's more of a people challenge than the technology challenge. It's when both processes comes together, and that's where the magic happens.
Right, okay. Thank you for that, Richard. I would like to actually just move on right now to the business case for using satellite imagery in financial services. I know a lot of people are interested in that, and Eli, you had mentioned a little bit earlier about the ROI. So I'd like to start with you. Do you think you could tell us whether the technology has given you the ability to generate revenues and control the costs? And what's been the commercial advantage of employing satellite imagery to give, I guess, you have a B2C model, like a business to customer model, so you're directly serving the smallholder farmers. So really interested in that perspective.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you're making a loan, there's two things that matter. There's how much does it cost you to put that loan out there, and then what portion of the capital out there plus interest do you get back. And so I think that our technology approach, and this moves beyond just remote sensing, has given us significant advantages on both fronts. You know, our cost to getting a farmer to a loan is extremely low, which is super important in the context of lending to a farmer who's farming, you know, 1 or 2 acres or 3 or 4 acres, as well as bring down defaults without having to spend the amount on either kind of underwriting and data collection or on sort of post-loan servicing and collections that would typically be required, you know, particularly in a rural context where these sort of in-person interactions can be extremely expensive. And so, you know, I guess, has it given us the advantage, the ability to generate revenue and control costs? I mean, we're a young company, we're only two years old, but I'd say so far, I mean, it's given us significant advantages across our entire lending life cycle. From, how do we make an initial assessment about whether somebody is creditworthy and we want to be able to work with them, to ultimately how do we monitor them across the course of the season. And I think the key for us has been, being able to operate in an integrated way. So you asked about kind of our B2C model. Obviously we're often asked about, sort of B2B approaches, and that's something that we'd be happy to consider in the future. But we see the real advantage from a cost as an ROI perspective in being able to kind of control the entire process and design the entire process to capture exactly the data that we need to make our lending decisions, and then manage that process post actual loan.
Right. Okay. That's really interesting, and also inspiration for others out there. So Richard, turning to your model, which is different from Apollo's, where harvesting is actually serving financial institutions. So more of a B2B business model. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your business and revenue model?
Sure. So we work with financial institutions who give lending to the farmers, whether you are giving loan to 100 farmers in Kenya or 14,000 farmers in Myanmar. Our business model is a subscription-based model. We have, although we are touching here on the credit risk, we have built an entire suite of application which allows a lender to capture your farm the loan application, to build a true credit profile of a farmer, which brings in data from n number of different sources. And then we have built an AI-driven credit risk model system, which allows each lender to build their own model, set threshold, set compliance policies, and so forth. And then we have a loan approval dashboard, which allow a lender to easily look across the incoming applications and the portfolio which may be running right now. And eventually, the approved application moves into a monitoring and collection dashboard, which allows especially the large lender an ability to have a view, sort of a semi-live view on what farmers may be doing. There's an update coming in every 15 days on how things may be changing, and so on and so forth. So it's a subscription-based model where a lender, based on the scale and the scope, choose to opt for various services and pay for them accordingly.
Okay, great. So you're saying subscription-based model, and is there an integration fee in terms of the software that you are providing them, and that's the dashboard?
Yes and no. It depends on how big the lender is. If the lender is small and they don't have core banking system or other MIS system, they can probably run fully on our entire ecosystem of the harvesting agri-lending suite. However, as we deal with large lender, they do happen to have existing core banking system and MIS systems, and at that point we do integrate with them. And of course, that could vary based on how big that integration effort could be, and we charge upfront about those integrations.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And Eli, I actually just saw one question that was posted that I thought maybe you could answer now, and relating to the sort of your business model directly to the consumer, and you're working with smallholder farmers. So someone was asking that a lot of the farmers, for example, in South Asia, and I know you work in Kenya, they have small farms, less than 5 hectares of land, and there could be multiple cropping, and valuing that farm will assist in credit scoring, but it can be really challenging. So just getting back to some of your business model, where you do have some smallholder farmers that have less than an acre, half an acre, etc. I'm just wondering, again, about that commercial advantage of using satellite imagery, and how you are, what your experience has been.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the reason we're all here the reason we're all here, bottom line, is that the world of satellite imagery is changing. I mean, even 5 years ago, the best options you had in the free imagery space were probably Landsat, and that was 30-meter resolution. So yeah, as you get down to that half-acre level, you're struggling to really see anything. Over the last 5 to 10 years, the world really has shifted to a place where, you know, we can get from Sentinel to A and B, we can get 10-meter imagery for free, and, you know, from Planet can get down to 3 to 5 meter resolution imagery, you know, when we need it. And so we're able to bring together, you know, a really nice sort of multi-sensor approach that today relies primarily on free data, since, you know, some of the new free programs really have started to deliver a ton of value, you know, in a way that wouldn't have been possible 5 to 10 years ago.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And David, in your experience, have you seen evidence of a sustainable or a revenue generating business model using satellite imagery? And if you have, what has been the key factors to success?
Sure. So all the projects, just referring back to the UK Space Agency Fund again, all the projects within that have to, at the application stage to the fund, have a very robust, even if a hypothesis, sustainability stroke commercialization plan. And then throughout the many years that we work with them, they're 3 to 5 year projects typically, they have a lot of support on developing that commercialization strategy. So we are seeing good signs of success emerging from those projects. And I think, given that we work across so many different sectors, in addition to agriculture, it's difficult to call out lots of unifying success factors. But I think the one that stands out to me is that you have to get the business case to work for all stages of the value chain. So taking an agricultural example of that, we may be, for example, working with a company like Airbus and Space and Defence, a very large company, multinational, that provides and operate the satellites themselves and provide the imagery and the analytical insights that run on top of that imagery. The business case has to work for them, there has to be a return for them. Then equally, the players that are taking that data, such as Apollo and harvesting, and running the machine learning analytics on top to provide the agricultural products and insights, the business case again has to work for them. And then to the end user, so in the case of these examples, the smallholder farmer, or even the larger scale agribusiness, or the Ministry of Agriculture, again, the business case has to work for them. So when they pay for the service, if there is a fee, it has to be attractive compared to how they're solving their problem at the moment. So, for example, on Ministry of Agriculture, if they're trying to forecast nationwide what the yield will be nationwide, or even at a regional and local level of, for example, wheat or maize or sugar, the service being provided by the satellite based service has to be more cost effective than the way they're doing it at the moment. And if all of those business cases line up along the value chain, then that's where long-term sustainability kicks in, because it's in everyone's best nature. And we're putting a lot of focus on this, as I said, in the UK Space Agency programme. And actually, we'll be publishing a report with our colleagues at London Economics, their space division, next March, called The Cost Effectiveness of Space in Developing Countries. And it will use the data coming out of each of the projects to, by sector, identify where and when and how space is most cost effective to get the best sort of return on investment in using space. And that'll be a publication, public domain publication, next March. So through the Phyto team, we'll make sure everyone on this call can have access to that in the future as well.
Yes, we'll definitely share that, and thanks, David, for sharing that with us. I'd like to right now focus on how Apollo and harvesting as companies had to transform to ensure that both of your organizations could actually employ this innovative and nascent technology, meaning the satellite imagery. So Eli, as a B2C company, what were the skills, the technical infrastructure, capital, et cetera? What did you need to make this happen? And what were some of the challenges you faced during this creation and transformation? I understand this is a huge question, so answer how you like, but it would be really interesting, I think, for our listeners.
So, I mean, our experience has been that these problems are hard, and that it takes significant iteration, where iteration means repeated failures and then occasional successes, to drive the business value that we're looking for. And so I think we were very fortunate to come at this problem, having just come as a team, at least several of us, from spending 4 years working on similar, although different problems in the commercial agriculture space in the US. And so, we've sort of had the experience of seeing a lot of the failure modes and overcoming them, when we started working on this. But even from there, in terms of thinking about transitioning some of the opportunity and the technology that we've been working with there to the smallholder context, it's taken time. And so we've been fortunate to have, investors who really understand the vision of what we're building, and a fantastic team who understands that, particularly in agriculture, where you can't just launch an A/B test and test it out with all your customers in 15 minutes. You have to wait for the crops to grow, and so you're fundamentally constrained on the learning side, and frankly just the rate of data collection, which is key to all the work we do. That these problems will take time, and so I think that in terms of skills, technical infrastructure, capital, and vision, I mean, we've been fortunate to come in with a lot of experience and be able to bring some real capital to this problem. But I think we've also been fortunate to have a team that understands that, particularly in agriculture, and also particularly in real science, that these problems take time to solve, and that the name of the game is building closed loop systems where you gather data, build models, test models, gather more data, build more models, test those models, and are constantly learning and iterating on your models, because you don't just show up and say, hey, like, I put satellite imagery in my slide deck and now we solved all these problems and our business is awesome. It just isn't how it works. It takes time and significant dedication.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you and your team really needed that time that it takes to build some of these models, and you needed the skills. And so it seems that one of the challenges that you may have faced was the training data that's needed in order to build these models and prove the predictive power. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, one of the things that I think most people get wrong about, call it machine learning businesses, is they think that machine learning businesses are fundamentally modeling problems. They have this image of the lady in the room up until 4 a.m. who finally just builds that perfect model and solves the problem and unlocks all that business value. And you need fantastic models, and you need brilliant people, but the name of the game in machine learning businesses is clean data, full stop. If you don't have clean data, you have nothing. And in agriculture, gathering the clean data that you need to constantly test and iterate just takes time. And so, alongside the modeling and the satellite data, I mean, one of our biggest areas of focus is how do we build this closed loop of, constant gathering of clean data to improve our models. And so I think that's been sort of a core area of focus for us. I think people often get distracted by the kind of, the attractiveness of thinking about, well, let's just throw some neural nets at this problem and everything will be grand. And we've certainly benefited substantially from some of the developments in unsupervised and semi-supervised learning. But at the end of the day, if you don't have data, you have nothing.
Right, and one of our colleagues, Mirza Dean, wrote a paper on big data and interviewing 30 organizations, and a lot of the fintechs mentioned this challenge of having to transform yourself almost to collecting this data and having this training data yourself, because there isn't necessarily a marketplace to exchange the data and have this data. So you're sort of coming in and doing this yourself, which can be challenging. Thank you, Eli. So Richard, just turning over to Harvesting. As a founder of Harvesting, what were the strategic decision points that you had to make to employ satellite imagery? And what were the challenges that you faced during this transformation?
So for us, like way back before even I, started harvesting, I was playing with the drones, and what I realized that although they are awesome, have a really great imagery power, sub-centimeter resolution data. When you put this in the context of being able to serve small farm holders spread across millions of hectares, that was not good enough. And that was the turning moment for me to look into satellite imagery and build the expertise and understanding of how that may change the world. And, we ended up, with some great team members here who used to work for NASA and European space agencies, people who have worked many decades solving these complex problems, and we're very excited to have them on board as part of the team. It's a team full of scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs like me, who's trying to solve the problem. And I want to echo some of the things Eli said. As a new company trying to solve this problem of financial inclusion in using different technology, here, the speed of experimentation is a key. And because it's agri-lending, the speed of doing one experiment in actually giving a loan to a farmer, waiting for that loan period to get over, seeing whether the NPA or NPL, how that may have impacted, it takes a lot of time. So it's not just about neural network. It's about being able to even experiment faster on whether the model has actually worked, help reduce the risk for the lender you have worked with. So those are some of the key challenges. So it's not just a remote sensing and AI team working here. It's the team who also understand deeply how the lending works on the ground, and being able to also understand tangential problem, because for us, we are a service provider to the financial institution, and we are not into business of selling remote sensing. We are business of solving the problem, making the lending more efficient and scalable for the lenders. And it requires us to build a lot more understanding and a lot more tool sets so that we can serve our lender end to end.
So it seems like you're saying you need both the technical skills, like the scientific skills in remote sensing, which your team has, and also understanding the financial and the lending perspective. And I just saw one of the questions that was asked by an attendee, and given that financial institutions can be risk averse and may find smallholder farmers in particular risky clients because of a perception of inability to pay back loans, then how are you working to convince them on this segment, and also using remote sensing, satellite imagery, etc.?
Yes, so for us, we are not right now going out and trying to convince who is not already serving small farm holders. We are going out and working with the lenders who are already serving small farm holders, and that's a much easier conversation to have. And when we go there, again, remote sensing is just one means to solve a problem. We are not selling remote sensing there. What we are selling them, and a prospect here, that using the AI, using the alternative data sets such as remote sensing, we have several different types of data coming in, both from the ground staff, from the government agencies, from other data feed, that when they all come together, that's when we can solve the problem for the lender. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, and thank you for that. So the last question I have is for all three of you, and then we'll open it up to questions. I see that we have quite a lot of questions. So how do you think or hope that the use of satellite imagery will evolve in the development space?
I can take that again. Yeah.
Richard, go ahead.
Sure. So I think that it will continue to play a major role. As Eli was mentioning a few minutes ago, the quality, the resolution, the cost of getting multi-sensor satellite imagery data is drastically coming down. That helps us visualize the earth the way we have never seen before. That also allows folks or companies like us to analyze that data at scale. I know we now have huge amount of computing power. At Harvesting itself, we have 10,000 plus computers running in parallel processing this data. So we have unforeseen amount of data coming in. We have unforeseen amount of compute power available at our hand. And that will continue to play a major role in terms of development, be it being able to see how floods are affecting farmers or even beyond, or it could be the fire, and several, the development needs can be fulfilled, which would not be possible otherwise without remote methods.
Thank you, Richard. David, I think you were going to say something as well.
Sure, thanks. So we've spent the last few months working with the European Space Agency trying to assess this question, or something very similar to this question, because they have a very keen interest to work with the national space agencies in Europe and the US and Japanese, etc., space agencies, with the development agencies of Europe and the international financing institutions to try and mainstream Earth observation into sustainable development. And they have a program called Earth Observation for Sustainable Development that you can see on their website for further information. A few of the key findings in that, one of them's been discussed quite a lot already, the declining cost of data. There's a huge amount of data coming out of the Sentinel satellites that ESA operates now, and the commercial high-resolution data costs are coming down. So I think broadly the sort of data availability bit is being solved. And I think the big challenge is that EO and remote sensing is complex, it's difficult. You need very advanced software engineering talent, machine learning talent. It's tricky stuff. And until it simplifies, it will be slightly out of the sort of expertise of many people, unless they're highly trained like the teams at Apollo and Harvesting. I think when that occurs, that simplification will see a greater uptake across the world to solve local problems. There's organisations like Radiant Earth Foundation who are on the call today, who actually have, I think this week or last week, opened their platform at app.radiant.earth, which is a good effort in terms of trying to provide simplified access to Earth observation data for development. So I think that these things are starting to be addressed. And then I think the third thing that really needs to happen is there just needs to be more sort of awareness of the benefit in development of Earth observation and remote sensing. It's new, it's nascent, it's still a little bit uncertain as to where the biggest use cases are and where the highest cost effectiveness is. And the more we learn as a community, the more we test, the more we trial, the more we scale, and ultimately share lessons like on this call, the faster that adoption will occur. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. That's really helpful. Eli, is there anything you'd like to end with?
No, excited to dive into the questions.
Sorry? Okay, dive into the questions.
I'm good, just excited to dive into the questions.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read off some of the questions that I'm seeing. And thank you everyone so much for these. These are really great. I'm going to start with a question that Pedro Matos, and he says, what could be the role of large international organizations with a big presence in the field? So for example, World Food Program, Save the Children, etc., to provide training data or validation of models and satellite image products in exchange for access to the products for free or at a discount. And Eli, I know you talked a lot about training data, and I don't know if this is something that you'd like to tackle.
Sure, happy to. So I think it's a great question. And obviously, like Ruchit and I both talked about, anything we can do to get more better training data faster is of enormous value. And so, I think, with data, the devil's always in the details. And so the chances that anybody out there has sort of, the lending and repayment data set tied to the GPS coordinates of each, of a customer's field probably isn't that large. But often we found that through techniques like transfer learning,
there is a huge amount to be learned from other data sets. And so I would be extremely keen to talk to anyone on the call who has data sets that they think might be useful, and very open to thinking about ways that we can kind of collaborate and share products or learnings in exchange for data. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in there. Obviously, folks have been working in the smallholder ag space for decades, and and companies in the satellite imagery space are obviously just absolute newcomers. And so anything that we can do to benefit from the investment and expertise, particularly in areas like sharing of data, I think is a really fantastic opportunity. And so I'd encourage anybody to reach out. You can find me on apolloagriculture.com or on LinkedIn.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to answer this question? Okay, so we have another question for any of the panelists, and is how can we motivate funders to see the return on investment to invest in open labeled image training libraries? And these assets are high value to other sectors as well as gender equity, land and property rights. So what is the ROI argument to be made?
Sorry, hold on, I'm just reading the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously the funding space is a diverse space. And so I don't think there's any secret key. And I think particularly for stuff like labeling, I mean, it kind of depends what the labels that you're trying to build are. For something like building a labeled data set of, just to take sort of the canonical example that GiveDirectly used when they first started talking about satellite imagery, like tin roof versus thatch roof. Building that labeled data set, we're talking about a relatively small amount of money. On the flip side, building an enormous labeled data set of, actual loans requires setting up a whole business and raising the capital and finding the risk taker and all of that. And so I think, obviously there's an enormous amount of variation in terms of, kind of what labels you're trying to generate. But I think that fundamentally, I mean, the one case that you might consider making to funders is, I think the question sort of answered it, right? I mean, this is stuff that deduplicates effort that's happening across a variety of organizations and has the potential to really accelerate the work of people across spaces. And so particularly if you can come up with labels that you feel like provide value, across use cases, my guess is if you can get it in front of the right funder, and it certainly will need to be somebody thoughtful who understands the sort of, remote sensing and ML space, I think that'll be a powerful argument. But I think the key will be sort of, what's the label and when and how do you expect it to be used?
Thank you, Eli. So we have this other question on, someone would like us to talk a little bit more about the accuracy of satellite imagery for crop loss assessment, and if that has the potential to completely replace on-the-ground assessments.
Yeah, Maha, I'll give a point of view on that in reference not to cross-loss assessment, and then maybe I'll pass to the panelists on that part. But in terms of replacing on-the-ground assessments in any use case of satellite imagery, I don't know if it will be fully replaced. Certainly, you always need to train up the systems, particularly the machine learning aspects. And the way you do that is to cross-compare what you think you're seeing through satellite imagery with ground truth. So you send field teams, you test from the ground, and you see if the two things compare. And if they do, great. If they don't, you have to readjust the system. So I think that will always be required. In addition, a lot of the projects we work with bring in imagery not from satellite, but for example from UAVs, from planes, to again sort of double check that what you're seeing from the satellite or what you believe you're seeing is actually what you're seeing, or is actually what's happening on the ground. So I think I think on the ground assessment will always be required at some point of the process, but I'll pass to maybe someone else on, particularly for cross loss assessment.
Richard and Eli, would either of you like to add to that?
Happy to provide a quick thought, which is that I think eventually, sure, but in the interim, you're going to see the highest value in, again, and I'm repeating myself, these sort of closed loop processes where you keep a human in the loop. And so you have a model that predicts the crop loss, and then you're sampling a portion of those in real life and seeing how the model does, and then giving the model sample in the areas that appear to be extremely heterogeneous, or sample in the areas that appear to have high crop losses. So you can have a higher density of samples in those regions. And so I think that, ultimately, yeah, I think we are moving towards a world where we can replace crop loss assessments entirely, but I don't think that we're in a rush to get there. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of power that the combination of in-person assessment and remote sensing plus machine learning can provide in concert.
Thank you, Eli. And I think this question is a little bit related in terms of the credit risk. And so Dan Fairweather is asking whether the credit risk is actually tied to exposure to climate risks at all.
It does. I mean, at least that's the perspective we have, and it reflects to a certain extent on our solution, such as I was mentioning earlier, that we provide insights to the lender in terms of how a flood may be affecting, how the drought, how the fire, if it may have happened, may affect. So we are not there yet fully, wherein we can predict those climatic changes. I mean, I think that's a huge problem on its own. But as we get signals from the weather stations and other sources, we are right now correlating that data and showing the lender how that might be impacting their portfolio, either currently or how it might start impacting in upcoming days. So yes, there is a relationship there.
Thank you. And we have a lot of questions, but we're running out of time. So there's one more question, time for one more question, and then we'll try to get to answer some of your questions when we send the recording. So there's someone asking a question on missing data in regions with high clouds. So in that context, how do you actually deal with predictions given that there's no data for base models?
So I can take that. Absolutely correct. It's not a perfect world where you have all the training data available to train your model and go off the chart. It's a human machine orchestration which needs to be done, keeping the business objective in the mind. So in cases where you don't have data, you still try to add value by digitizing the process, and hope that by investing early in that digitization process, hopefully the next season you would have that data so that the upcoming season you can build the model and take that next step. So it's an orchestration between the manual processes, understanding of business, and a little bit more context on what may be happening on the ground is important here. Not everything is modeled.
Yeah, that I totally agree. The one other thing I'd add is that, alongside that, it's also just about repeat time. I mean, if you're working in a world where you're getting, one image every 3 weeks and you're operating in the tropics during rainy season, then, if 2/3 of those images have a cloud, then you might be looking at, an image every 9 weeks, which is obviously not acceptable for most applications. On the flip side, if you're getting an image every single day and 2/3 of those are cloudy, then you're still getting multiple images per week. And so just looking at sort of some of the shifts towards microsats, and just generally more rapid repeat times through Sentinel and other programs, it also does start to help to address that issue, just sort of at the fundamental data level.
The other thing just to mention here, there's a lot of advancement in something called synthetic aperture radar, which penetrates clouds. So Sentinel has a radar-based satellite, and there's many other from the commercial sector and Airbus, etc. And that has a very big advantage of penetrating cloud. So you can see through in the tropics, where there's 95% cloud coverage, every day or 95% of days, you can still see to the ground. Now, it doesn't give you quite the sort of visual aspect that an optical satellite would give you, and it's also more complicated to process, but it does have that advantage.
Yeah, I just want to add there a little bit. At Harvesting, we have started to use SAR data as well, and fusing all these Landsat, MODIS, Sentinel-2 SAR data to get as much possible, fill the data gaps needed. But that is still not enough. We would have to look at contextually and build the business step by step.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all the panelists for your insights. It's been really great, and we have a lot of questions. So people are really interested in the work that you're doing and appreciate the time. And thank you to everyone who has attended. We will be sending you the recording, and we've also pasted in the link to our survey. If you can just please take a couple of minutes, it won't take long, to just send us some feedback on this webinar, that would be really great, so we can just keep having better and more webinars for you. And thank you so much to Nick and DFI for hosting the webinar. Again, we'll be sending you the recording, and we're going to try to answer some of your questions that weren't answered. So thank you again, and have a good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. Bye-bye.